On August 27, 1896, a war broke out. It had a declared enemy, warships, cannons, and a body count of over 500 people. And by the time most wars are just getting started, this one was already over. Because this war, the shortest in recorded human history, lasted exactly 38 minutes. This is the story of the Anglo-Zanzibar War. The war that lasted only 38 minutes. Setting the stage. To understand a war that ended almost as soon as it began, we have to go back 6 years earlier, to 1890. That year, Britain and Germany signed the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty, essentially carving up East Africa between them. Germany took control of mainland Tanganyika, modern-day Tanzania. Britain took Zanzibar, a small but wealthy island off the coast, famous for its spice trade and, less proudly, its role in the slave trade. Zanzibar technically still had its own ruler, a sultan. But in practice, Britain called the shots. Any new sultan needed London's blessing before taking the throne. For a while, that arrangement worked. The reigning sultan, Hamad bin Thuwaini, was cooperative with British interests. Then, on August 25, 1896, just 2 days before the war, Sultan Hamad suddenly died in his palace. Some historians believe he was poisoned. And they have a pretty strong suspect. The cousin who wouldn't wait. Within hours of the Sultan's death, his cousin, a prince named Khalid bin Barghash, marched into the palace and declared himself the new ruler. There was just one problem: he hadn't asked Britain first. The British consul in Zanzibar, Basil Cave, reminded Khalid that under their treaty, no new sultan could take power without British approval. Khalid needed to step down, immediately. Khalid's response was essentially, no. He barricaded himself inside the palace with roughly 2,800 armed men, a handful of artillery pieces, and a converted royal yacht anchored just offshore. He was betting that Britain wouldn't actually risk a war over a succession dispute. He was wrong. The ultimatum. Britain moved fast. Royal Navy warships sailed into Zanzibar's harbor, cruisers and gunboats, under the command of Rear Admiral Harry Rawson. At dawn on August 27, the British delivered a final ultimatum: Khalid had until 9 a.m. to lower his flag and leave the palace. Khalid sent back a defiant message, something to the effect of, "We have no intention of hauling down our flag, and we do not believe you would open fire on us." He was betting his life, and the lives of his men, on that belief. At 9 a.m. sharp, the ultimatum expired. Khalid's flag was still flying. The war. At 9:02 a.m., the British opened fire. 5 warships unleashed a coordinated bombardment on the Sultan's palace: high-explosive shells, thousands of machine gun rounds, rifle fire, a level of firepower the defenders had no real way to answer. The palace's wooden structure was no match for naval artillery. Within minutes it was on fire and collapsing. Zanzibar's small defending fleet, really just one converted wooden yacht, was sunk almost immediately by return fire. The shore battery defending the palace was knocked out. Prince Khalid, watching the palace fall apart around him, slipped out a back door and fled, reportedly climbing over a wall, and made his way to the German consulate, where he was granted asylum. By 9:40 a.m., the guns fell silent. The Sultan's flag had been shot down. The fighting was over. Total elapsed time, 38 minutes. The cost. Here's the part that tends to get lost in the shortest war ever, trivia: this wasn't a bloodless joke of a conflict. Around 500 people, mostly Zanzibari palace guards and civilians caught in the crossfire, were killed or wounded in those 38 minutes. On the British side, 1 sailor, injured. That imbalance says a lot about what this war actually was: not really a war between two comparable militaries, but a colonial power demonstrating, in the most brutal terms possible, exactly who was in charge. The aftermath. That very afternoon, Britain installed its preferred candidate, Hamad bin Muhammad, as the new Sultan, a ruler far more willing to cooperate with British interests. As for Khalid bin Barghash, He escaped Zanzibar with German help and lived in exile for 2 decades. He wasn't captured until 1916, during World War I, when British forces finally caught up with him. He spent his final years living quietly in Mombasa, and died in 1927. One more footnote worth mentioning: the following year, in 1897, Britain formally abolished slavery in Zanzibar, something the old regime had resisted for years. Today, the Anglo-Zanzibar War holds the record books as the shortest war in history, a strange piece of trivia, the kind of fact that shows up in quiz nights and "Did you know" videos. But behind the record is a much heavier story, about empire, about how quickly power can be enforced when one side holds all the weapons, and about how a conflict that took less time than this video has taken to watch still left hundreds of people dead. Sometimes the shortest stories in history carry the longest shadows.